Dawn broke over forward operating base Sentinel, and the mountains caught the first sweep of amber and gold. Dust drifted low across the tarmac, stirred by the constant rumble of generators and the quiet hum of men and women preparing for another mission. Phantom Unit, the military's most decorated sniper team, worked with mechanical precision. Their rifles, sleek and engineered from carbon fiber and titanium, reflected the morning light. Digital scopes projected readouts in pale blue, adjusting for wind and distance. Each operator moved through practiced rituals, calibrating equipment that represented the pinnacle of modern warfare. Their efficiency carried the kind of confidence born from years of recognition, medals, and whispered reputation. Commander Riker Blackwood stood before a topographical hologram, its shifting blue light drawing lines across his weathered face. He traced the infiltration route with the blunt edge of his finger, pointing to ridgelines and valleys as his team nodded. The mission was simple, at least on paper: extract a high-value intelligence asset from behind enemy lines. Phantom Unit had done it before, and there was no reason to think today would be different. But when Captain Zephyr Merrick approached carrying a datapad, the ease of the moment shifted. "We've got a last-minute addition," Merrick announced. The words carried weight. Phantom Unit did not do last minute. Riker's expression darkened, and the room fell into silence. The silence broke with the sound of boots on concrete. A woman entered the briefing space, her steps unhurried, her presence quiet but undeniable. Amaris Thorne carried herself with the restrained precision of someone who knew exactly how to conserve motion, how to move without wasted energy. But everything else about her seemed out of place. Her tactical gear lacked the unit insignias and shimmering interfaces of the others. It was older, worn, yet meticulously cared for. More than anything, the rifle slung across her back drew every eye. The long, weathered Mosin Nagant with brass fittings looked like something salvaged from a museum, and the handmade scope mounted on it carried the strange intricacy of clockwork. Elon Drake, Phantom Unit's lead sniper and the only soldier to boast confirmed kills beyond 1 mile, stepped forward with a smirk. He examined the rifle with a mock reverence, running a finger along the scarred wooden stock. "What museum did you steal this from?" he asked. That scope couldn't spot an elephant at 200 yards. Laughter spread quickly through the ranks. Sharp and dismissive, Amaris said nothing. She sat at the edge of the room and made a small adjustment to the scope's brass dials with a tool that seemed just as old as the weapon. The silence she carried around her was heavy, unyielding. Riker's eyes narrowed as he studied the file on Merrick's datapad. Entire sections of text were blocked out, lines upon lines black to nothing. The only note legible was a brief reference, Phantom Echo. His chest tightened. That name had been buried with Meridian Valley, dismissed as propaganda, erased from the record. He glanced up and caught her eyes, steady and unreadable. As the team dispersed to complete final checks, Riker lingered. Amaris moved to shoulder her rifle, and in the shift of her sleeve, he saw the faintest glimpse of a tattoo on her wrist, a symbol half hidden but familiar, a mark he had seen once in a report stamped classified. His expression froze, but he said nothing. Around here, the noise of preparation resumed. Laughter, chatter, the confident rhythm of a unit secure in its superiority. Against it all, Amaris's silence stood in sharper contrast. She adjusted her rifle with care. Movements deliberate. Expression unreadable. True strength, Riker realized, was not always loud or wrapped in modern steel. Sometimes it sat quietly, waiting for the moment when silence would speak louder than all the noise. The midday sun bore down on the mountain range, flattening shadows and painting the terrain in stark contrasts of rock and sand. Phantom Unit moved like shadows themselves, their gear humming with quiet digital precision. Camouflage nets unfurled, adaptive fabric blending seamlessly with stone and dust. Drones lifted into the sky on whispering rotors, their feeds beaming to digital scopes that tracked every shifting contour of the valley. Each sniper settled into position with a confidence that came from knowing they were equipped with the most advanced tools available. Amaris Thorn walked apart from them, following the narrow ridgeline to the position assigned to her. Ridge Point. It was the furthest location from the valley, exposed to wind and open sky. With no cover to mask her silhouette, it was a posting that carried no weight in the mission, no expectation of impact. To the others, it was a dismissal. The kind of place you sent someone to keep them out of the way. She neither protested nor questioned. Her silence was its own answer. As she set down her pack on the barren rock, Talon Everest passed by on his way to another overlook. His words carried the sneer of someone who felt no need to hide contempt. "Command must really hate you," he muttered. "Or maybe they're setting you up to fail. Either way, try not to get yourself killed with that relic." He did not wait for a reply. None came. Phantom Unit deployed their rangefinders. Glowing readouts, adjusting for wind speed, humidity, and pressure. Amaris pulled a worn leather journal from her pouch, its edges softened by years of use. She opened to a page filled with dense handwriting and symbols that looked like calculations written more for memory than for others to understand. A brass compass followed, set neatly against the stone to confirm bearings. From another pouch, she withdrew a set of brass tools, so finely crafted they might have been mistaken for watchmakers' instruments. She used them to adjust the dials of her scope with patient precision. The contrast could not have been greater, where Phantom Unit crouched beneath layers of synthetic camouflage, their rifles tethered to feeds that calculated bullet trajectory in fractions of a second. Amaris prepared in silence. No digital display, no tactical interface, just the steady tick of her tools and the rustle of paper as she cross-referenced her notes. Her actions lacked drama, but carried an undeniable certainty. On the comms, light chatter passed between operators. Jokes, clipped reports, reassurances. She remained quiet. Her presence noted only in her call sign when roll was taken. The silence pressed against them, heavier than the heat. The more they mocked her absence of technology, the more they found themselves watching her out of the corner of their eyes. What kind of soldier carried a compass into a battlefield where drones mapped every contour from above? Amaris laid her rifle across the rock, aligning it slowly with the valley below. The scope gleamed in the harsh light, brass catching the sun like a signal. Yet she did not flinch at the exposure. She seemed to belong to another era, a figure misplaced in the wrong war. But in the set of her shoulders and the unbroken calm in her movements, there was no hesitation, no trace of fear. On every other ridge, Phantom Unit was concealed, hidden in shadow and digital shrouds. On Ridge Point, Amaris was a lone figure against the sky, exposed, solitary, and disregarded. Yet in her stillness, there was the suggestion of something else. A vantage point none of the others had considered. Forced to the margins, she had been given the clearest view of all. The first shell landed with a deafening roar that sent dust plumes spiraling across the valley. The extraction team dove for cover, their radios crackling with clipped warnings. More impacts followed in relentless rhythm, each detonation a hammer blow that shook stone from the ridges. Dirt rained down in choking clouds, shock waves reverberating up through the sniper nests. The asset was pinned, crouched behind broken ground. As the soldiers struggled to shield him from the storm of fire, artillery fire, Eastern Ridge, 2.3 miles out. Zephyr Merrick's voice cut across the comms, steady but strained. "They'll be overrun in minutes if we can't shut that battery down." Phantom Unit snapped into motion. Through digital scopes, the source revealed itself. An artillery emplacement dug deep into the far ridge, barrels already adjusting to continue their bombardment. One by one, the snipers dialed in their targets, their carbon fiber rifles humming with micro-adjustments. Elon Drake fired first. His rifle cracked, the round speeding across the void. The impact fell short, scattering dust harmlessly down the slope. He cursed, recalibrated, and fired again. Another miss. I'm not getting stability at this range. He growled, frustration breaking through his usual calm. The crosswinds are tearing trajectory apart. Talon Everest tried next. His shot veered wide, swallowed by the gusting air currents funneling through the valley. Impossible shot. He muttered bitterly. Not with this wind. Not at this distance. Others followed, each attempt ending the same. The wind mocked their precision, dragging rounds off course. Scattering them against stone, shells continued to fall. Closer now. The extraction team trapped in a tightening circle of fire. We've got maybe 10 minutes. Zephyr reported grimly, scanning his readouts. They won't last longer than that. On Ridge Point, Amaris Thorn moved differently. She opened her leather journal, turning to a page filled with dense equations and notes in faded ink. Her gloved hand smoothed the paper flat against the stone. She studied the valley below, then lifted her brass compass, confirming bearings with deliberate care. While the others cursed their equipment, she reached for her pouch of tools. Small, intricate brass instruments glinted in the light as she made adjustments to her antique scope. Each turn was subtle, a fraction of a degree, her motions patient and precise. She wrote another figure in the journal, cross-checked it, then set the rifle firmly against her shoulder. From the comms came Elon's irritated voice. What are you doing? You'll only expose your position. Get down. Thorn. That relic can't reach them. She gave no reply. The wind clawed at her hair, tugging at her uniform, but her breathing remained steady. Her eyes stayed fixed to the scope. In her silence was a certainty that unsettled even the most seasoned operators. Commander Riker Blackwood raised binoculars, watching her settle in. As her sleeve shifted, he caught the faint mark of a tattoo along her wrist. Recognition flickered in his eyes, disbelief sharpening into focus. He lifted his comm. Hold fire. Everyone. Hold. Amaris drew a deep breath, exhaled once, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked with a raw, mechanical sound, stripped of the sleek efficiency of modern weapons. The bullet tore away into the distance, vanishing into the shimmering heat. Silence followed. 1 second. 2. 3. The artillery continued, soldiers bracing for another barrage. 4 seconds. 5. Skeptical glances exchanged across the unit. 6 seconds. The valley seemed to hold its breath. On the 7th, the enemy ridge erupted in a thunderclap. The artillery position disintegrated in a controlled explosion, flames curling upward into the sky. Enemy forces scattered in chaos, their firing silenced as shock rippled through their ranks. The comms went dead quiet. The same voices that had mocked her hours earlier now faltered into silence. Elon stared through his scope, lips parted, unable to process what he was seeing. That's not possible, he whispered finally. Not with that rifle. Not at that distance. Not in this wind. Amaris worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round. Target neutralized, she said into the comms, her tone quiet and unshaken. Riker lowered his binoculars, his expression hard to read. What lingered in his gaze, however, was no longer doubt. It was recognition. Commander Riker Blackwood kept his binoculars raised, unwilling to look away from the woman crouched on the ridge. The sleeve of her uniform had ridden just high enough during her shot to reveal a faint mark burned into her skin, a stylized insignia, half faded with time, yet unmistakable. His pulse slowed as recognition sank in. That symbol had haunted after-action reports, whispered in rumors, dismissed officially as propaganda. He lowered the binoculars, his mouth dry. The Meridian Ghost, The silence across Phantom Unit stretched longer than the echo of her rifle. Every sniper who had ridiculed her now stared in mute disbelief. Their carbon fiber rifles gleamed uselessly in the sun, while her century-old weapon still smoked faintly. The noise of mockery, which had seemed so confident at dawn, had been swallowed by the sheer stillness of what she had done. Riker spoke quietly, his voice steady. "Hold fire. All of you." The command carried a weight none questioned. He moved along the rocks until he stood close enough to see her profile. Her hands were calm, sliding another round into the chamber with the same precision as before. "You're from Phantom Echo," he said. Not as a question, but as a truth, he had finally recognized. Amorous Thorn did not look up. The brass dials of her scope caught a glint of light as she adjusted them again. Meridian Valley was not an accident. She replied, simply, but command buried it. Before Riker could answer, her eyes narrowed, fixed on a hillside beyond the smoking artillery site. She lifted her scope, adjusted one more dial, and spoke with quiet certainty. "Secondary team, North Ridge. 4 minutes until they have line of sight." The others scrambled to confirm. Talon Everest cursed under his breath as his digital optics found nothing. "I don't see." Riker raised his thermal scanner. Through the grainy display, faint figures emerged, hostiles moving under camouflage. Their outlines just visible against the heat of the ground, exactly where she had said. He let out a long breath, the weight of realization settling heavy in his chest. "Contact North Ridge," he confirmed, his voice sharper. Now, the unit pivoted instantly, weapons swinging toward the threat they had not even known existed. Respect replaced doubt in an instant. Their movements no longer edged with derision but with trust. Ellen Drake, who had mocked her most harshly, swallowed hard before straightening. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand in a formal salute toward her exposed position. The others followed, one by one, their gestures solemn. No laughter left among them. She did not acknowledge the salute, not directly. Instead, she adjusted her scope once more and tracked the hidden force. "Always look where they don't want you to see," she said softly, more to herself than to them. Through the thermal imagery, the enemy force advanced. Unaware their diversion had failed. Phantom Unit fired first. This time, coordinated volleys cutting down soldiers who moments earlier had been invisible. Amorous fired only once. A precise shot that broke their commander, where he crouched behind cover. As the last echoes faded, the battlefield settled into silence again. The extraction team moved safely at last, shielded by warnings they would never know had come from her. On the ridge, Amorous packed her tools back into the worn pouch, her journal resting beside her like an artifact from another era. In that moment, every soldier who looked upon her understood. The Meridian Ghost had not been a rumor, nor a myth. She was flesh and blood, standing among them, carrying a legacy erased by orders yet undeniable in the field. What was unseen had shaped the visible in respect, once withheld, now settled over her, like the only armor she had ever needed. The armory was silent, but for the faint hum of fluorescent lights, steel racks gleamed with modern weapons, their polymer frames and digital optics reflecting sterile precision. Against them, the rifle on the bench looked out of place, a relic of another century. Its wooden stock bore scratches smoothed with care, and the brass scope attached along its spine glowed faintly, as though it had absorbed the light of countless dawns. The unit gathered in an uneasy half-circle, while Amorous Thorn polished the brass with a square of soft cloth. Her movements were unhurried, as if she were touching something alive. Ellen Drake stepped forward first, her earlier derision replaced by reverence. "May I?" she asked, fingers hovering above the rifle. Amorous gave a small nod. Ellen traced the gears set into the scope, tiny brass teeth meshed with jeweled pivots, intricate as clockwork. more like a watchmaker's masterpiece than a military optic. It isn't just magnification, she murmured. No. Amaru said. She opened a hidden latch in the stock. Producing folded photographs, sealed in protective film, 3 women looked out, one in a faded World War uniform, another in the green fatigues of the Cold War, and the third unmistakably amorous herself, younger, standing in desert Kir. My grandmother, my mother, and me. She placed them gently on the bench. The silence deepened. Commander Rieker shifted. His jaw set. Phantom echo. He muttered, Project Parallax. Amarus lifted her palms. Fine scars spread across them. Pale threads that caught the light. The scope connects to the shooter. It calculates more than ballistics. Every possibility. But it demands a price. Elowen frowned. What kind of price? The body pays. Amaus replied. She reached for a folder tucked into her pack and slid out a medical chart. I am 42 years old. According to my last cellular analysis, my body is closer to 60. The words landed heavy. Even hardened soldiers shifted uneasily. As though confronted with a wound, no armor could deflect. Elowen searched her face, trying to understand. Why would anyone agree to that? Why your grandmother? Your mother. You. Why not just walk away? Amaris smoothed the photograph of her mother with one finger, her expression calm. Because some shots matter more than years of life. Meridian Valley. 342 soldiers were about to be massacred. My mother's generation could not intervene. Mine could. One shot cost me a decade, but it saved them all. Her voice was steady. Yet beneath it lay the weight of generations. Elowen lowered her gaze to the brass scope again, the gears gleaming like a machine too precise for ordinary hands. So every time you fire, you lose more time. Yes. Amaris closed the compartment and secured the latch. My grandmother died at 50. Her body worn to 90. My mother followed the same path. I know what awaits me. She touched the rifle as though it were both curse and inheritance. The others exchanged glances. The enormity settling in. These were soldiers trained to face death. Yet none had considered what it meant to pay life in increments. Unseen. With every squeeze of the trigger, Elowen finally spoke again. Her voice keyed. Then why not destroy it? Why carry it still? Amaris looked up, eyes calm but burning. Because someone has to. Because seeing what others cannot is both gift and burden. And because even if the world denies what you did, the truth remains in every life spared. The room stayed hushed, filled with the reverberation of her words. The rifle lay across the steel table, brass fittings glowing like an ember, its silence louder than any speech. The secure communication room was cold, its walls lined with steel and humming monitors. A single table dominated the center, polished to a sterile sheen, with projection screens glowing across the far wall. The faces of officers filled each frame, their uniforms immaculate, their eyes sharp and distant. At the center sat General Verena Blackwell, silver hair pulled into a severe bun that spoke of decades of command. Her voice cut through the silence without preamble. Specialist Thorne. Commander Riker. We need answers. Amaris Thorne stood at rigid attention, her rifle absent, but her bearing still marked by discipline. Riker remained beside her, his expression restrained but tense. With a flick of the general's hand, a side screen illuminated. Medical charts bloomed into view, charts dense with data. Amaris's scans stretched across the wall in cold precision cellular patterns mapped against her age, showing advanced degradation. Every line of data marked years taken, not by disease or injury, but by something else. The officer studied in silence before the general spoke again. You are 42 years old. These scans place your cellular age closer to 60 place, with Lee Dashen's Ford. We buried Project Parallax because this is the cost. accelerated aging, lives shortened by decades. Her tone was clinical, yet beneath it pulsed a rare undercurrent of regret. Amarus neither flinched nor lowered her gaze. I made that choice. My grandmother made it before me. My mother did the same. Each of us carried the burden, knowing recognition would never follow. We knew the price. General Blackwell leaned forward, her lined face etched with shadow from the screen's pale light. And you were prepared to continue without acknowledgement, to be forgotten, as they did. I did my job. Amarus replied simply. That was enough. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the hum of electronics. The officers exchanged unreadable glances. Then General Blackwell exhaled slowly and gestured again. New documents filled the screen's official records. Once sealed, now unbound. Medals of honor long denied appeared with engraved names: Sienna Thorne, Leora Thorne, and Amarus Thorne. Presidential citations glimmered in digital ink. Perhaps that was our mistake, the general said quietly. 3 generations gave their lives in silence. You deserved more. Riker's jaw tightened as relief flickered across his face. He had fought to hold the truth in place when denial seemed easier. Now, at last, the weight shifted. The general continued, her voice carrying a solemn finality. Effective immediately. Project Parallax is declassified. The Meridian Valley operation is recognized as a successful mission. All honors are restored to Phantom Echo. And you, Specialist Thorne, are promoted to Major with immediate effect. You will lead the new Parallax Division. Amarus felt the weight of 2 decades pressing against her. A pressure built from silence, dismissal, and doubt. For the first time, her composure wavered. A single tear traced down her cheek, not from sorrow, but from the release of a burden carried too long. The officers on screen shifted, one by one, offering nods of acknowledgement. They were not smiles, nor overt praise, but something heavier. It was the recognition of a truth too long buried, dragged into light by sacrifice that could no longer be ignored. The room itself seemed changed. The sterile steel now filled with an invisible resonance. Light from the screens fell across Amarus, illuminating the faint scars on her hands. The silent testimony of what she had endured. Riker stepped forward and saluted, his motion crisp, solemn. One by one, others followed until she stood not as a forgotten replacement, but as a figure of respect. The general's final words lingered like an oath. Institutions bury what they fear, but truth endure. Major Thorne, it always endures. Amarus returned the salute, her voice steady. Then, let the truth stand. In the quiet of her quarters, Amarus Thorne sat at a metal table, her rifle resting before her beneath the pale hum of fluorescent light. She worked with steady hands, cloth in one palm, brass gleaming in the other. The scope's gears caught the sterile glow, every movement reflecting years of ritual maintenance. For decades, this act had been one of secrecy, her only means of preserving a legacy no one else would name. Now it was different. She no longer worked in silence for herself alone. Every stroke of cloth felt like an act of remembrance for her mother and grandmother, women who had given everything yet vanished from the record. On the table beside her lay a brass plate. Its engraving was simple but unshakable in meaning. 3 names cut into its surface: Sienna Thorne, Leora Thorne, and Amarus Thorne. Beneath them, the words. They saw what others couldn't. Amarus traced the letters with her fingertip, feeling the grooves, as though each mark connected her across time to the women who had come before. For years, their sacrifices had lived only in memory. Now their names would endure in light rather than shadow. The next morning, the training hall echoed with footsteps as 12 recruits assembled in formation. 6 men and 6 women, each chosen not only for skill but for a rare compatibility with the Parallax design. They stood at attention, their new scopes waiting in cases beside them, polished brass set against modern composites. For many, this was the first time they had seen the legendary weapon up close. Though stories already rippled through the ranks, Amorous entered without ceremony, her uniform bearing the insignia of Major, her posture calm but commanding. Behind her, a case displayed her grandmother's preserved rifle. Its wooden stock, worn by use, was mounted with care. The intricate scope protected beneath glass. Beside it hung photographs her grandmother in sepia tones, her mother in faded color, and herself, now newly honored. Generations aligned in silent witness. She let the recruits take in the display before she spoke. Her voice carried evenly, without flourish. Precision isn't about technology. It is about seeing what others don't and acting when no one else will. The recruits listened, rapt, their eyes moving between her and the relic behind glass. After the session, Elowen Drake lingered, no longer the skeptic who had mocked her rifle. A journal of calculations rested in her hands, pages filled with attempts to replicate the patterns she had glimpsed. "I've been trying to understand," she admitted quietly. "It isn't only about numbers, is it?" Amorous offered the faintest smile. "The scope shows possibilities, but you choose which to make real. That choice defines everything." Elowen nodded, her expression marked by a seriousness that had not been there before. She was no longer a rival, but a student, eager to inherit not only skill but understanding. Later that evening, Amorous returned to her quarters and set the brass plate beside her rifle, the engraved names gleaming in the soft light. The photographs of her grandmother and mother now hung above her desk, no longer hidden in the stock of a weapon, but honored openly on the wall. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel not only the weight of their sacrifice, but the pride of carrying it forward. The legacy was no longer a burden carried alone. It was a vision restored, alive in new eyes, passed to a generation prepared to see what others could not. The training fields of Fort Obsidian carried a strange kind of electricity. Rows of recruits moved carefully across the dirt, their shoulders square, their eyes fixed on the strange brass-fitted scopes mounted on new rifles. They were the first class to touch technology that had once been sealed away, and their wonder filled the air like the ringing of a distant bell. Amorous Thorn walked slowly among them, her boots pressing dust into the morning ground. The uniform on her shoulders finally bore the silver oak leaves and medals that had been denied for so long. Yet it was not the weight of cloth and ribbon she felt, but the unseen weight of 3 generations standing with her as she paused at each young recruit. Sariel Ramirez, a sharp-eyed recruit with a quiet smile, lowered her scope and shook her head in disbelief. "It's like seeing music," she whispered to her partner. "Everything moves in patterns you don't normally notice, but you feel them anyway." The words caught Amorous's ear, and she stopped beside the young woman. That was exactly how her grandmother had once described it. The description brought a flicker of memory, a weathered photograph of Sienna Thorne in uniform, the same look of awe in her eyes after discovering the parallax effect. Amorous nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Hold on to that feeling, Ramirez. It is not about the scope, it is about your mind learning to see the invisible." The drills pressed on, and the voices of instructors called corrections over the field. Digital systems logged every adjustment, every breath, every angle. But the real training lived in the way these recruits learned to trust possibility itself. Watching them, Amorous felt something rare, something she had not allowed herself in years: hope. Later that afternoon, General Verena Blackwell arrived, unannounced. Her presence silenced the range, and the recruits snapped to attention. But the general's eyes sought only Amorous. Together they walked up the ridge beyond the training grounds, the same kind of high ground where Amorous had once stood alone with her antique rifle. The wind carried across the slope, cool and unrelenting, as if reminding them of the mountains that had witnessed impossible shots and hidden sacrifices. The general removed a small velvet box from her coat and pressed it into Amorous's hand. Inside lay a brass compass, the surface worn with age, but etched with the insignia of Project Parallax. "This belonged to your grandmother," the general said quietly. "It was taken when the program was buried. It is time it returned to your family." Amaris closed her fingers around the compass. It was heavier than its size suggested, as if it contained not just metal but memory. She turned it slowly in her hand, the brass catching the sun, the needle trembling toward north. She thought of her grandmother, who had given decades to an idea no one was meant to know, of her mother who had carried the burden in silence, and of herself. Once dismissed as a relic with an old rifle, now that same relic had brought them all here. The general looked out across the recruits below. "The president will announce the existence of Parallax next week. It will not remain only in the hands of soldiers. Disaster relief, search and rescue. Even medicine will carry it forward. We cannot control what the world does with it, but we can guide the way." She turned her gaze back to Amaris. "That task falls to you." For a moment, Amaris did not answer. She let the silence settle, the kind of silence that had once been mocked but now commanded attention. She thought of the cost in years her family had paid, the time stolen by each shot, and she thought of the recruits below, laughing despite their discipline, faces young and unscarred by war. Finally, she nodded. "Then I will guide them. Legacy should not only be remembered, it should point forward." That evening, her quarters glowed faintly in the low light of a single lamp. On the table lay 3 photographs. Restored and framed Sienna Thorne in sepia uniform, Leora Thorne with her experimental scope, and herself in fresh attire, no longer hidden. Beside them rested a brass plate engraved with the words, "They saw what others couldn't." The preserved rifle stood nearby in its case, polished and untouchable, its scope gleaming under the glass, like an artifact, both ancient and eternal. The compass sat beside the photographs, its needle steady, as if affirming direction not just of geography but of destiny. Amaris sat at the table for a long time, hands folded, breathing in the quiet. She felt the years she had lost in her bones, but for the first time, she did not feel diminished. Every shot, every scar, every silent dismissal had led to this moment, when the truth stood revealed. The legacy of her family was no longer a rumor or a ghost story. It was carved into history, honored, and prepared to shape a better future. When dawn broke again, she walked outside and held the compass up toward the rising light. The mountains glowed in amber and gold, just as they had on the morning she first walked into Phantom Unit's scornful silence. Now those same peaks stood as witness to change. Behind her, recruits were already assembling on the range, rifles in hand, eyes bright with the hunger to learn. She let the compass fall back into her palm and closed her hand around it. Some victories were measured in battles won, others in medals, but the truest victory was this, that sacrifice had turned into legacy, and legacy into guidance. She whispered into the breeze, not for herself, but for the women who had come before. You were never forgotten. With the recruits waiting, the general watching, and the mountains bearing silent testimony, Amaris Thorne stepped forward, not as a ghost, not as a forgotten replacement, but as the guide of a future that would finally see what others could not.